December 1944. Northern France is locked in winter. The ground is hard, the air metallic with cold. Somewhere beyond the hedgerows, German artillery fires by instinct alone, blind but lethal. At the edge of a forward command area, engines idle quietly. Men wait. No one speaks. Then George S. Patton Jr. walks forward. No helmet, no escort, just a tall figure moving past the last friendly positions, boots crunching over frozen earth that has already changed hands more than once. His driver watches him go, the distance widening with every step. Officers glance at each other, calculating ranges, lines of sight, the randomness of a single rifleman hidden somewhere ahead. Minutes stretch. The general does not turn back. Someone finally breaks the silence, voice low, almost resigned. He's not coming back. That moment, quiet, unreal, suspended between bravery and disaster, was not an exception for Patton. It was the result of a lifetime built toward the front line, where risk was not avoided, but embraced. By the time the Second World War reached Western Europe, George Patton was already a known quantity inside the United States Army. Not simply as a senior officer, but as a symbol. Loud, profane, theatrically disciplined, and relentlessly aggressive. His reputation had been forged long before Allied troops set foot in France. Patton had come of age in an army that still studied cavalry charges and classical warfare. He believed deeply in history as a guide. Hannibal, Caesar, Napoleon. To Patton, war was not chaos, it was motion. Momentum mattered more than caution. Speed mattered more than perfection. And commanders he believed belonged where decisions were irreversible, close enough to smell the gunpowder. That philosophy first revealed itself during the interwar years, when Patton became an early advocate of armored warfare. Tanks, to him, were not defensive tools. They were weapons of penetration, shock, dislocation. He studied engines and tracks the way others studied maps. When war came, he intended to move faster than any enemy could react. North Africa, 1942, gave him the stage. After early American failures, Patton was brought in to restore discipline and confidence. He enforced strict standards, uniforms pressed, helmets worn, salutes crisp, even under fire. Critics called it obsession. Patton called it survival. Order, he believed, created fighting spirit. Fighting spirit won battles. In Tunisia and later in Sicily, Patton's forces moved aggressively, sometimes recklessly. He bypassed strong points, he drove his units hard. Casualties were real, but so were results. His advance across Sicily was one of speed and audacity, though it came at a cost, political and personal. The infamous slapping incidents in 1943 nearly ended his career. For a time, he was sidelined, stripped of command, and publicly disgraced. Yet even in exile, Patton remained dangerous to the enemy. German intelligence believed he was the Allies' best offensive commander. That belief was so strong it became a weapon. During the lead-up to D-Day, Allied deception plans placed Patton in command of a fictional army group in southeast England. The Germans watched him closely, convinced that wherever Patton went, the main blow would follow. When Allied armies broke out of Normandy in the summer of 1944, Patton finally returned to active command. The U.S. Third Army was activated on August 1st. What followed was one of the fastest advances in modern warfare, hundreds of miles across France in weeks. Patton drove his army forward until fuel, not resistance, stopped him. It was during this campaign that Patton's habit of appearing at the front intensified. He wanted to see the ground with his own eyes. He wanted soldiers to see him, and he believed absolutely that his presence near danger sharpened the entire army behind him. That belief would soon place him closer to enemy lines than anyone thought possible. By autumn of 1944, the war in Western Europe had entered a new phase. The rapid advance across France had stretched Allied supply lines to their breaking point. Fuel shortages slowed armor. Ammunition was rationed, roads clogged with trucks carrying everything from rations to replacement engines. The illusion of an easy victory began to fade. The German army, though battered, was not finished. It had retreated in fragments, but it had not collapsed. Units dug in along rivers, towns, and forested high ground. Defensive lines hardened. Weather turned against the Allies. Rain turned roads into mud. Fog grounded aircraft. Winter crept in early and unforgiving. The U.S. Third Army, under George S. Patton Jr., faced a dilemma. Patton's doctrine depended on movement, on relentless pressure, on keeping the enemy off balance. But without fuel and with weather closing in, speed became harder to sustain. For the first time since Normandy, Patton had to slow down. He hated it. Patton responded the only way he knew how, by moving himself forward. He visited.
These visits were not staged. They were unpredictable. Patton believed that danger shared bonded commanders to soldiers. He also believed that fear, if controlled, was useful. Seeing the commanding general exposed to the same risks as a rifleman sent a message no speech could deliver. At the same time, Patton was acutely aware of how the enemy viewed him. German intelligence tracked his movements. His name appeared in intercepted communications. His presence near a sector often triggered heightened German readiness. Patton knew this and used it deliberately. Sometimes he wanted the enemy to see him. Sometimes he wanted them guessing. Late 1944 brought the Ardennes Offensive, the Battle of the Bulge. German forces smashed into thinly held American lines in December, creating chaos and panic. Patton reacted faster than anyone thought possible, pivoting the Third Army north in a matter of days. It was a logistical and operational feat that stunned both allies and enemies. But speed again carried risk. Command posts shifted rapidly. Front lines blurred. In the confusion of winter fighting, boundaries between rear and front dissolved. Artillery could reach farther than maps suggested. Patrols slipped through gaps. A lone officer walking forward could cross into enemy territory without realizing it. It was in this environment, cold, fluid, dangerous, that the incident behind the title occurred. Not during a grand offensive or a televised speech, but during one of Patton's routine, obsessive inspections of the front. An ordinary moment, a short walk, and a realization that even legends can step too far. The story of that moment is best understood by examining it from multiple angles. Those closest to Patton saw the danger first. Not the generals in distant headquarters, but the men who stood beside him every day. His aides, his radio operators, his driver. They watched patterns form, the sudden stops, the abrupt orders to pull over. The moment Patton stepped out of the vehicle and began walking, sometimes without explanation. For them, Patton's fearlessness was not abstract. It was personal. If he was hit, captured, or killed, they would live with the knowledge that they were there when it happened. Many accounts from staff officers describe a constant tension, pride in serving a legendary commander, mixed with dread that his habits would eventually end in catastrophe. Patton did not announce his intentions. He rarely consulted maps before walking forward. He relied on instinct and terrain. His entourage learned to count steps, seconds, the sound of distant gunfire. When he moved too far ahead, they felt it physically like a wire pulled tight. The driver, often left behind with the vehicle, experienced the longest waits. Engines idling, silence stretching, no way to follow without orders. When the general disappeared over a rise or through a hedgerow, imagination filled the gap faster than intelligence reports ever could. Patton believed leadership was visible. He rejected the idea of command from the rear. To him, generals who stayed back became disconnected from reality. Maps lied. Reports softened truths. Only first-hand observation revealed the actual state of a battlefield. This philosophy made him effective but dangerous. By placing himself near the front, Patton bypassed layers of protection designed for continuity of command. His presence energized units, but it also risked chaos if he were suddenly removed. Senior Allied leaders worried about this privately. Losing Patton at a critical moment would not just cost a man. It would fracture momentum across an entire army. Yet Patton accepted that risk. In his view, war was not meant to be safe. He often spoke of destiny, of fate, of having lived past lives as soldiers. Whether belief or bravado, it shaped his behavior. He acted as if survival was already decided. From a purely military standpoint, Patton's forward movements made little sense. A general carried no rifle. He could not call artillery faster than a forward observer. His death would not stop a single German battalion, but could cripple an Allied offensive. Front lines in late 1944 were fluid. In forested areas, particularly in France and Belgium, German patrols infiltrated aggressively. A lone figure, even in uniform, could stumble into an ambush with no warning. Snipers required only seconds. Patton's habit violated standard doctrine. Commanders were expected to observe from protected vantage points. Reconnaissance belonged to scouts. Risk belonged to infantry. But Patton believed doctrine existed to be bent. He trusted his sense of the ground more than protocol. And more often than not, luck favored him. Still, every step forward narrowed the margin between command and catastrophe. These human fears, leadership beliefs, and tactical risks all converged around one truth. Patton was pushing a boundary others refused to cross. And eventually, that boundary pushed back. To the German army, Patton was not just another Allied general. He was a threat that existed as much in imagination as in reality. German intelligence officers tracked his movements obsessively. Intercepted reports repeatedly overestimated the size and intent of formations believed to be under his command. His name alone suggested attack. This perception mattered. German units stiffened when they believed Patton was nearby. Defensive lines were reinforced. Reserves were held back longer than necessary. In several cases, German commanders misjudged Allied intentions simply because they assumed Patton would strike aggressively, regardless of actual conditions. Had Patton been captured or killed near the front, the psychological impact would have been immediate and enormous. For the Germans, it would have been a propaganda victory. For the Allies, a strategic shock. Both sides understood this. That is what made his presence beyond secured lines so extraordinary and so reckless. Patton understood morale as a weapon. He believed morale could outweigh material shortages, weather, even numbers. His speeches were famous, but his actions spoke louder. Soldiers who saw their commanding general walking unarmed near the front internalized a message. Fear was optional. This was not accidental. Patton cultivated legend deliberately. The polished helmet, the ivory-handled pistols, the sharp language. It all fed an image that suggested inevitability. To follow Patton was to follow momentum itself. But legend is fragile. It depends on survival. Every time Patton walked into danger, he risked not only his life, but the myth that sustained his army's confidence. There was an unspoken ethical question beneath Patton's behavior. Did a commander have the right to risk himself so freely when thousands depended on his leadership? Courage inspired, but recklessness endangered others indirectly. Some officers admired Patton deeply, but questioned him privately. They wondered whether bravery at the top justified the potential collapse of command if fate turned suddenly. Others believed that Patton's presence reduced casualties by forcing faster decisions and sharper awareness. There was no clear answer. War rarely provides one. What is clear is that Patton's habits narrowed the distance between symbol and mortality. And in late 1944, during one particular inspection, that distance nearly vanished entirely. The incident itself did not unfold with gunfire or explosions. It unfolded quietly, subtly, and that made it more dangerous than any battle. The incident occurred during one of Patton's routine forward inspections in late December 1944 as the Third Army pressed through contested territory in northeastern France. Snow lay in patches across the fields. Visibility was uneven, clear in open ground, blind within tree lines and folds in the terrain. The front was no longer a line at all, but a shifting zone measured in probability. Patton's command vehicle stopped near what staff believed to be the forward limit of friendly positions. Artillery could be heard to the east, sporadic but close enough to register as immediate. Patton stepped out, as he often did, scanning the ground ahead. There was no dramatic announcement, no warning. He began walking. At first, no one stopped him. This was normal. He walked a short distance, hands clasped behind his back, head tilted slightly forward. Then he continued, past the point where infantry had been seen minutes earlier, past the last identifiable markers of American presence. Aides hesitated. They checked maps that were already outdated. Radio traffic was confused. Reports overlapped, contradicted each other. Units had shifted overnight. Patrols were out. Gaps existed. Patton did not slow down. From the vehicle, the driver watched the general's figure shrink against the pale winter ground. The distance was no longer symbolic. It was measurable. Rifle range, mortar range. The realization came gradually, not all at once. The general was no longer clearly within friendly lines. No shots were fired. No alarm sounded. That was the danger. In this kind of terrain, a single German soldier could be watching. A patrol could be resting just beyond a rise. A sniper could be waiting, unaware of who had wandered into his scope. The staff did not rush forward. They could not. Chasing Patton would only compound the risk. They waited, counting minutes that felt longer than any barrage. This was the moment when the driver spoke quietly, not to dramatize, but to state what felt increasingly possible. He's not coming back. The words were not despair. They were calculation. Patton was alone now, by choice or by instinct, inside a space where command authority offered no protection. And for several long minutes, history balanced on the absence of sound. What made the moment so dangerous was not drama, but uncertainty. There was no single ridge that marked the enemy's edge, no clear trench line. In late December 1944, especially during and immediately after the Ardennes fighting, German units often occupied forward pockets, small groups left behind deliberately to confuse, delay, or ambush. They moved quietly. They waited. Patton had stepped into that ambiguity. From the command vehicle, the staff could do nothing but listen. Radios crackled with fragments. Company positions reported, then contradicted. A battalion thought secure was suddenly unknown. The maps in the vehicle were hours old. In that time, entire platoons could vanish. Patton, meanwhile, continued forward until something finally changed. Not an explosion, not a rifle shot, a pause. Those who later described the incident noted that Patton stopped suddenly, as if sensing something wrong. He looked around, not hurried, not alarmed, simply alert. The ground ahead offered no confirmation of safety. No movement, no voices, only quiet. Whether he realized he had gone too far will never be known with certainty. Patton left no formal account of this exact moment. But those who knew him believed he understood risk instinctively. He did not need confirmation. He turned. The walk back was unremarkable. No escort ran to him. No orders were shouted. He returned the same way he had gone, alone, boots crunching in the cold earth. When he reached the vehicle, no one spoke at first. There was relief, but also something else, recognition. This time, the margin had been thin. Patton climbed back into the car without comment. The engine started. The inspection continued elsewhere, as if nothing unusual had occurred. To Patton, perhaps nothing had. To the men who watched him disappear and reappear, it was a reminder that even the most confident commanders were subject to chance. There was no reprimand from higher headquarters. No report filed. The war did not pause for reflection. But among Patton's staff, the incident stayed alive. It was retold quietly, without embellishment, as an example of how close the general had come to erasing himself from the war in a single, silent moment. That near miss did not change Patton's behavior, but it did change how others saw him. Not as invincible, but as mortal, and that understanding would shape the final months of his command in ways that extended far beyond that frozen field. In the immediate aftermath, nothing official changed. There were no new security protocols issued for Patton, no standing orders to keep him further from the front. The incident never appeared in an after-action report. On paper, it did not exist, but within the 3rd Army headquarters, the effect was real. Patton's aides became more vigilant. Drivers kept engines running longer. Staff officers tracked his movements more closely, though always discreetly. No one wanted to confront him directly. Patton was not a man who responded well to restraint, especially when it came from subordinates. Any attempt to limit his access to the front risked being interpreted as cowardice, or worse, disloyalty. Instead, his staff adapted quietly. They shortened inspections when possible. They provided more detailed briefings before stops. They tried to anticipate his instincts without interfering. It was an unspoken effort to reduce risk without challenging authority. Among frontline units, stories circulated. Not exaggerated, not romanticized. Simply the fact that Patton had walked forward alone. For some soldiers, it reinforced their admiration. The general was willing to face the same danger they did. For others, it raised concern. If Patton could be lost so easily, what did that say about the fragility of command? Higher Allied leadership remained aware of Patton's tendencies. Dwight D. Eisenhower, as Supreme Allied Commander, understood Patton's value and his volatility. Eisenhower had protected Patton before, after Sicily, believing that his aggressive instincts were essential to defeating Germany. But Eisenhower also recognized that Patton was irreplaceable at that stage of the war. Losing Patton in late 1944 or early 1945 would have been a severe operational blow. Not because another general could not command the Third Army, but because Patton's particular style, his speed, his pressure, his psychological effect on both friend and enemy, could not be replicated quickly. Despite this, Patton continued to operate close to the front through the final months of the war. He was present during the push into Germany. He crossed the Rhine. He visited liberated camps and destroyed towns. He saw firsthand the consequences of the war he had helped drive forward. The incident in the frozen field did not alter his course, but it did sharpen the awareness around him that survival, until then taken for granted, was never guaranteed. As the war drew to a close, that awareness would collide with a final, tragic irony, one that would define Patton's story in the public memory far more than any battlefield risk he ever took. When the fighting ended in Europe in May 1945, Patton was still alive, something many around him had quietly doubted would be the case. He had survived artillery, air attack, ambush-prone roads, and his own impulses. The danger that had followed him through North Africa, Sicily, France, and Germany had finally receded. Or so it seemed. In the months after victory, Patton became increasingly restless. The war that had defined him was over, and the political reality of occupation frustrated him. He clashed verbally with Allied authorities. He spoke candidly, too candidly, about post-war Germany, the Soviet Union, and what he believed the next conflict would be. His bluntness, once tolerated in wartime, now drew criticism. Yet none of that would end his life. On December 9th, 1945, less than a year after the moment when his driver believed he had walked too far into enemy territory, Patton was riding in a staff car near Mannheim, Germany. The vehicle collided with a U.S. Army truck at low speed. The accident was minor by battlefield standards. No explosions, no gunfire, no enemy. Patton was thrown forward, suffering a severe spinal injury. He was paralyzed from the neck down. 12 days later, on December 21st, 1945, George S. Patton Jr. died in a military hospital in Heidelberg. The contrast was striking. A man who had repeatedly exposed himself to lethal danger at the front survived the war, only to be killed by an accident far from combat. For many who had served with him, the irony was impossible to ignore. In retrospect, the frozen field incident took on new meaning. It became part of a pattern, not recklessness for its own sake, but a lifelong proximity to risk. Patton did not believe distance protected leaders. He believed engagement did. Historians would later debate whether Patton's habits shortened his life or simply reflected a temperament that could never have existed any other way. What is clear is that the war never managed to take him, even when it had multiple chances. Chance, in the end, proved more decisive than any enemy rifle. And that realization invites a quieter question, one that lingers beyond tactics, battles, or personalities. War often elevates its leaders into symbols. Medals replace doubts. Victories blur mistakes. Over time, personalities harden into myths. George Patton became one of those myths, a figure associated with speed, aggression, and certainty. But moments like the one in the frozen field cut through that image. There was no speech, no battlefield triumph, just a man walking forward, alone, into uncertainty. For a few minutes, rank meant nothing. Reputation offered no protection. History waited on the absence of a gunshot. That moment reveals something essential about Patton. He did not lead from behind calculations or abstractions. He led by proximity, by being close enough to danger that could not be ignored. That approach inspired thousands and alarmed many. It produced momentum and invited disaster. Both were always present. Patton survived battles that should have killed him. He crossed landscapes soaked in artillery fire. He stood where commanders were not supposed to stand. And when the war finally ended, it was not violence that claimed him, but chance. The driver's words, "He's not coming back," were not prophecy. They were recognition. recognition that even the most driven leaders live on a narrow edge between influence and mortality. Patton walked that edge willingly, and for a time, history allowed him to walk back. That is not heroism. It is humanity exposed under the weight of command.